My name is Mariah Molina. So a brief history of the theory. Okay, the theory was developed in 1960 by a group of sociologists. Throughout its time in history, people have also added extensions and additions just to further detail the process of becoming a deviant. So the conversation was first started by Frank Tannenbaum. Later in 1951, Edward Lemert made explicit distinctions between primary deviation and secondary deviation. Later, Howard Becker became his successor and developed the process of adopting deviant behavior in 1963. What is labeling theory? So, labeling theory is a version of symbolic interactionism. Sociologists believe that it's important to focus on the relationship between deviant and conventional people. So that's the reason why I chose to talk about this theory, because last week I talked about a positivist theory where sociologists view deviance as an object and they study it in itself. We're opposed to labeling theories who are constructionists. They see it as a subjective term and they analyze all the context that goes into it because they're more concerned about the nature of deviance. In addition to this, they believe the relationship is governed by meanings and symbols imposed on each other by each other. With this being said, the meaning is more important than the act. So, like I said, sociologists see this subjectively. If someone was to commit a deviant act, sociologists that identify with labeling theory not necessarily are concerned with what the act is. They're more concerned who imposed the act, who said it was deviant, why did they say it was deviant, and such forth. These sociologists are not concerned with finding the cause of deviance, but instead they wish to understand the dynamic process of symbolic interactionism between both deviants and non-deviants. I really like that they incorporate both parties in their studies. I think that gives a very big, broad view of what deviance is, both to people who are deviants and non-deviants, and what their actions have consequence on deviant behavior. What labeling theories ask. Who applies a deviant label to whom? What consequences are there for the ones who label and the ones who are labeled? Consequences of labeling. Labeling theorists believe that for the label, consequences tend to be more negative. So the person is first labeled as a deviant, which makes them believe that they're deviant. This leads and can be consequently arise from to engage in deviant behavior. This may be the reason why they engage in deviant behavior. It's definitely a contributor that they see themselves and think themselves to be deviant, so they just might as well engage in deviant behavior. Consequences for the labeler tend to be more positive because they use the labels on others to control those who are less powerful, and also control within them to keep control within themselves. So they usually use people who are labeled as deviants as a form of example, like, hey, if you step out of line, this is what your life is going to be like. There's two kinds of deviant behavior, as I mentioned before. Lemert made the distinction between the two. He keyed the term primary deviation, which is considered to be the first act when a child does deviant behavior, but the child believes that it's innocent, and it's not till the adult labels it as deviant that is considered deviant. Secondary deviation is an extension to that, when this is the point in time where both the child and the adult now see the behavior as deviant. So, critiques of labeling theory. Many theories critique this theory in particular because it doesn't explain the origin of deviance, but I think that's not a fair critique. Being said that the theory doesn't really concern itself with the origin. Like I said, it's really mainly questions the nature and the relationship between deviants and non-deviants. So to impose that concern on a theory that's not really concerned about it is, I think, unfair. A second reason it receives critique is because the research fails to support labelist theory's assumption that being labeled as a deviant is going to make you more deviant. And lastly, It's just not logical the way that it's presented. So they present the fact that powerful people are the ones who impose labels, but which implies that powerful people cannot be deviants themselves, which is not fair to say, and it's also not true. They fail to address that situation. What about people who are in power or hidden deviants and is it not considered deviants? But either way, they fail to address it. So that is labeling theory.